Hi, boys and girls. It's Miss Kelley, and for the next couple of weeks until the end of school, we are going to be reading a new book called Escape from Alcatraz. It's the mystery of the three men who escaped from the rock. Now, Alcatraz was a federal prison. It's now a national park and a museum, and hopefully we'll be going on a virtual field trip there soon. But Alcatraz, when it was open and a working federal prison, that was in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and up until 63. Now, they also call it the Rock. It's the nickname. And the reason why it's such a neat place and unlike any other jail or federal prison is because it is surrounded by water. It's right in the middle of the ocean near San Francisco. And it was also known as escape proof. So they put many of the men there that were very dangerous, and also or that they just kept escaping from the other federal prisons. And so it cost a whole lot of money to run while it was open, and that is one of the main reasons why they shut it down. But anyways, we are going to start reading this. This is a nonfiction book. It means that it's all true information. So here we go. Chapter 1, Sound the Alarm. At the crack of dawn, Cell Block B in the Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary was silent and dark. Clarence Carnes, a longtime prisoner, lay on his bunk, already awake. He'd barely slept all night. Suddenly, the wake-up bell rang out, just as it did every morning, and the prisoners began to stir. They had 15 minutes to get out of bed, go to the bathroom, and get dressed. Some stayed in bed to grab a few extra minutes of sleep. After 15 minutes, a whistle pierced the air, and the prisoners walked to the front of their cells. It was time for the morning head count. Carnes was one of the first inmates at the front of his cell. He stood eagerly at the bars and looked around. He listened as the guards walked down the aisle and counted prisoners one at a time. He had reason to believe that the count might be short this morning. His friends had planned a daring overnight escape from the escape-proof prison. Dun, dun, dun. He hoped they had made it. What Carnes heard next made his heart leap. One of the guards called for a recount. It was possible that the guard simply had made a mistake and needed to count again. But Carnes didn't think so. His friends were smart, and they had a good plan. They had been working on their escape for months and been painstaking about every last detail. Right now, Carnes imagined they were breathing from fresh air outside. He suppressed a smile as Officer Lawrence Bartlett, the guard on duty, counted again. Officer Bartlett soon noticed that prisoner John JW Englin had not gotten up. He walked over, reached between the bars, and tapped the prisoner's pillow. But England did not respond. Bartlett called Lieutenant Bill Long down for a look. He told Long that England was either dead or he had been replaced by a life-size dummy. Long poked England's head. Still, England just lay there. He poked it again harder, and this time his fingers pushed right through. Startled, he swatted the head and it rolled off the bunk onto the floor. It was a dummy. Long jumped back. Long reached through the bars, yanked the blanket down, and saw rolled up blankets and clothes that England had placed there to look like his body. He quickly went to the next cell, that of Clarence England, John's brother, and pulled off his blanket. Clarence's bed was also filled with blankets and a fake head. There was one more prisoner missing from the head count, Frank Morris. Long dashed over to Morris's cell and pulled the covers off his dummy's head and blankets. He was gone too. A call was made to the acting warden, Arthur Dollison. He lived in a duplex on the island with his family. When the phone rang in his home, Dollison felt a chill of dread go through him. It could not be good news to get a phone call right after the morning count. As he and more officers rushed to the cell block, an escape alarm blared through the prison and all across the island, indoors and out. Adding to the commotion, another prisoner was calling out to the guards from his cell. "I planned the entire escape," Allen West cried out. In his hands, he held what looked like a vent cover, only it was made of cardboard. Meanwhile, officers climbed up on the top of cell block B, which was constructed of prison cells stacked 3 high. Looking up, they saw a roof vent that had its bars removed. The prisoners had gone through there. The vent shaft led to the roof and was capped by a rain hood. But when officers got to the roof, they saw that the rain hood had been knocked aside. On the north side of the building, barbed wire had been cut from the fence. Outside the fence, the grass was matted down as if people had been there. The officers could hardly believe their eyes. The rock, the impenetrable fortress of Alcatraz, had been breached. That means people had escaped, boys and girls. And that had never been done before. Well, they had tried, but they were never successful. Dozens of officers fanned out all over the island. They searched the cell house, the workshops, storerooms, and other buildings. They checked an old dungeon below the cell house. They scoured the beaches, tramped through shrubbery, and inspected the caves along the shore. By boat, they patrolled the water around the island, looking for bodies in the cold, churning sea. At this point, Alcatraz officers realized that Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin were most likely not on the island anymore. They called the San Francisco office of the FBI and informed them of what had happened. The FBI alerted the local police, the California Highway Patrol, the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Coast Guard, and all the sheriff offices in the area. A search was begun by land, air, and sea. It was 7:55 a.m., about 40 minutes after the morning head count, and a federal investigation was underway. Back in cell block B, officers questioned other prisoners, including Clarence Carnes and Allen West. Years later, Clarence claimed to know a lot about the escape. He said he had helped Morris and the Engler brothers with several details, but he kept his mouth shut at the time and hoped others would too. Many prisoners had learned about the escape. They had heard the men digging in their cells at night, but nobody said a word to the officers. The situation was different for West. In the back of his cell, where there should have been an air vent, was a gaping hole. He had chipped away the concrete around the vent and knocked it out, and he had created a fake vent cover from cardboard. It was obvious that West was supposed to escape with the others, but something had gone wrong for him. He knew he could not hide his involvement with the plan, so he gave short answers to the officers' questions. But he was careful not to reveal too much. Chances are he didn't want to sabotage his friend's shot at freedom. While West was being questioned in the warden's office, the rest of the cell house was searched. Up above cell block B, investigators noticed that blankets had been hung from the bars that enclosed the area between the top of the cell block and the ceiling. What they found behind the blankets was stunning. A secret workshop full of tools, including a homemade wrench, a foot-long file, a stapler, a mirror, a flashlight, 3 spoon handles, and more. They also found rubber raft and a life preserver, both of which the prisoners had made out of raincoats and left behind for West. There was even a vacuum cleaner motor that the prisoners had used to power a drill. In Frank Morris's cell, they found magazine articles that explained how to make fake rafts and life jackets. John Anglin's cell contained art supplies and the paint that had been used on the dummy heads. Clarence Anglin's cell had knots of human hair left over from the dummy heads and more paint. One of the more interesting things the investigators found was in Allen West's cell, a road atlas of North America with the pages for Mexico removed. His cell also contained 3 hacksaw blades, 3 more spoons, and a chisel. The scope of the escape was incredible and complicated. All those stolen or improvised tools, a virtual hardware store hidden behind blankets, holes dug through 8 inches of concrete with spoon handles and other rigid utensils. It was clear that the escapees had planned it for a very long time. They had thought of everything, and they had a 9-hour head start. So boys and girls, remember, 3 men really escaped, but now they're finding out that it looks like there was one more that tried to escape that night, but something happened that that made him not be able to escape. The search expanded rapidly and was conducted by sea, land, and air. It covered the entire western United States. Highway patrol officers stopped and searched vehicles. Photos of the men appeared on newspapers all over the world. Where could they be? The FBI believed that the men could have made it ashore and were on the run, but the men had no money, no clothes, and no food. They were career criminals. Surely they would make a mistake sooner or later, like getting caught in a robbery, for instance. The FBI carefully monitored the Anglin family home in Florida in case the men turned up there or made a phone call to their relatives. A week after the escape, Warden Allen Blackwell received a postcard dated 2 days earlier. It said, "Ha ha ha, we made it." And it was signed Frank, John, and Clarence. Blackwell gave the postcard to the FBI, but they didn't have enough handwriting samples from the prisoners to make a good comparison. They thought it was probably fake, but as the days went on and no bodies turned up, it seemed more possible than that the men had actually successfully escaped. That is certainly what Clarence Carnes and most of the other inmates believed. Carnes had escaped other prisons, so he knew it could be done, and he knew that his friends had worked hard on their plan. Alcatraz was not escape-proof, as the warden always claimed. Even though Carnes was still stuck inside, Alcatraz had been beaten. He didn't necessarily think that he would escape, but it felt good to know someone had. Even Alcatraz couldn't kill all hope. Chapter 2, Life on the Rock. Frank Morris came to Alcatraz in January 1960 at 33 years old. He walked along the docks in handcuffs and leg irons accompanied by guards. The boat waiting for him, the warden Madigan, bobbed in choppy water. Morris, other prisoners, and the guards boarded the vessel, and the skipper pulled away from the dock. Alcatraz Island lay on the horizon, more than a mile ahead of them. It would be a long way to swim in frigid water. Remember, frigid, boys and girls, means freezing cold. Despite Morris's incarceration means jail, he did not intend to stay long on Alcatraz. Morris was a robber, but what got him sent to Alcatraz was his many, many prison breaks. Before this, Morris had escaped from 11 different prisons. Some men took up hobbies to pass the time in prison. Frank Morris hatched escape plans. Thinking about escape was about the only way he knew to keep himself going. He needed something to hope for. The warden Madigan docked at the island, and Morris got off the boat and boarded a waiting bus. His leg irons clinked as he walked. The bus hauled up a twisty, narrow road toward the beige prison at the top of the hill. Once there, Morris climbed up a set of stairs. At the top, a guard opened a gate to let him into a waiting room. Here his chains were removed, and he was ordered to take off all of his clothes. He stood naked as a doctor searched his body to make sure he wasn't smuggling anything in his ears, nose, or mouth. Morris was then taken through several doors and down a hallway between rows of cells. At every step of the way, he scanned the area for hints or ideas about a possible escape. Could a person slip through that vent? Could he file through those bars? Anywhere he looked, he saw guards. More guards than he had ever encountered in any other prison. And remember, boys and girls, he had escaped 11 of them. In a basement shower room, he was ordered to wash up. He was given fresh clothes, including denim pants and a gray shirt, and led to his cell. There he received another set of clothes, as well as sheets, towels, a toothbrush, and other toiletries. Then he was left alone. Morris sat in the dark and listened to his new home. He heard someone playing a guitar in another cell. He heard people chatting quietly, and he heard a whining sound. And sometime he realized it was the wind whipping across the island. Morris also looked out and cased his surroundings. There was a skylight. Was there any way to reach it? He watched the guards make their rounds, and he timed them. He noticed which guards were armed and which were not. Morris quickly got used to the dull routine on Alcatraz. In the recreation yard, which means they could go outside and play, Well, like basketball and sports and just have some fresh air. Inmates played softball, handball, chess, and other games. Men stood together in tight groups. It was cold outside, so each inmate was issued a heavy coat and a raincoat. Cells were subjected to frequent thorough searches called shakedowns. Officers came in and turned over the mattresses, cleared off shelves, and carefully inspected every corner. Sometimes without warning, an officer would come down the rows of cells with a rubber mallet and hit each bar. If any bar made a duller sound than the others, he knew it had been tampered with, mostly likely filed or somehow cut. Guards made regular rounds, glancing into cells as the men read and painted or slept. Every convict and every guard in the place knew every sound. If you dropped something, everyone heard it and knew what it was. And if the guards heard anything unusual, they rushed over to investigate. It was clear that anything hidden would have to be tucked away very carefully. Any illegal work, such as cutting bars or digging concrete or making a tool, would have to be done silently and between guard rounds. Within a couple of weeks, Morris was given a job cleaning vegetables in the kitchen. He also got moved out of his temporary cell into a permanent one on cell block B. His neighbor in the next cell was Alan West. West had been in Alcatraz for 3 years when Morris showed up in 1960. The men already knew each other from their time in Atlanta, Georgia prisons years before. Where Morris was quiet and thoughtful, West was a talker and a bragger. For that reason, Morris didn't care for him at first. Like Morris, West had escaped before and was considered a risk. So again, now we know why West is in Alcatraz, because he escaped too from the prison that he was in. That's why the men had been sent to Alcatraz. It was deemed impossible to escape from Alcatraz. After several weeks of cleaning vegetables, Morris got a new job as a library messenger. He delivered books and magazines to inmates throughout the prison. His next assignment was to the brush shop. There, he made brooms. This last job was a promotion and earned Morris some income, which he could spend on magazines, books, art supplies, and even musical instruments. The job also earned him good time, meaning that the more he worked without getting into trouble, the more time was taken off of his sentence. And the sentence, boys and girls, is how long he has to stay in jail for. One of the worst things about life on the rock was the boredom. The daily routine never changed. Sometimes men would get in trouble just so they would be sent to the treatment unit, or TU. In TU, convicts were kept in their cells all day except for a shower and time alone in the yard. But at least it was different from the daily grind. The worst offenses earned prisoners a trip to the hole, also known as a special treatment unit. In the hole, prisoners have no privileges and never saw the light of day. They counted how many days had passed by the number of meals they were served. In October 1960, Morris saw another familiar face in the dining hall, John Anglin, another man he knew from the Atlanta prison. Just like Frank Morris and Alan West, he was considered an escape risk because he'd escaped other prisons before. Who would have thought, boys and girls, that so many people escape from prisons? John, or JW, as he was known, came from a large, poor family. He committed most of his crimes in the company of his brothers, Clarence and Alfred. They were robbers. Most recently, JW had been locked up in Leavenworth Prison in Kansas with Clarence. The two planned to escape in bread boxes that were being shipped out, but a guard noticed how hard it was for the men to lift a box and ordered it opened up. Inside, he found Clarence JW, was then sent to Alcatraz for his part in the plot. Clarence was sent to the isolation block in Leavenworth. 2 months later, he was also sent to Alcatraz and assigned a cell next to JW. The authorities believed it would be good for the two men to be close together, since they were brothers, so they could talk about family matters. They didn't have any concerns that the brothers would be able to escape. The rock was, after all, inescapable. According to Clarence Carnes, in a later interview, an escape plan had began to brew in Morris's mind soon after the Anglins arrived. The first thing that got him thinking was a story he had heard from his neighbor, Alan West. West had told Morris about another convict who did electrical work up above cell block B years ago. The electrician had removed a fan motor from a vent shaft, and it had never been replaced. Except for the barred grill across it, the shaft was open. Morse tucked this information away. He didn't have a safe way to get out of his cell and into the shaft, at least not yet. Then he made another discovery. The concrete walls that made up the cells were corroded, which means, boys and girls, if something's corroded, it means it's falling apart. They could be scraped through over time with nothing more than a nail clipper, a spoon, or another common utensil. How much could he dig before it would be noticeable? How could he hide it? Other questions popped up. How big of a hole would he need to get through? How long would it take? Who, if anyone, should he invite into the plan? And suppose he got through the concrete. Then what? How would he get through the air shaft? How would he get off the island? He saw for himself how far it was to the main land. Swimming there would be foolish. By the time he made it, if he made it, he'd be exhausted, confused, and hypothermic. Hypothermic, boys and girls, means that your blood is so cold. It's like in freezing temperatures, and you die if you get like that. He'd have no civilian clothes. Heck, he'd have no dry clothes at all. He'd have no money, no food, and no transportation. There was a lot to figure out, but the plan had begun to take hold. The seed of hope had been planted. Now, boys and girls, this next thing is a text feature. It's actually two of them. It's a picture, an image of the cell block, and then underneath it's the caption, which is another text feature, and it says, a typical cell block view on Alcatraz. I highly recommend that you look at the actual print of the book that I've included for you, because it actually has pictures and they're really neat to see. Chapter 3, Down the Wrong Path. Frank Morris mostly kept to himself. He didn't talk much, didn't share his thoughts with others, not unless it would help him. He could be charming when it served his purposes, or stay under the radar. Highly intelligent, he was a loner, and in many ways, he always had been. Morris was an only child. His mother was 16 when she gave birth to him in 1926, and his father was a fugitive who had long since left his mother. Morris spent time in orphanages and foster homes until he finally ran away around age 11. So, boys and girls, this man was born in 1926, and his parents had died. He was in an orphanage. Well, one was, his dad was in jail. His mom had died. But can you imagine? He ran away from the foster homes and orphanages at age 11. Can you imagine being out all on your own, having to live life by yourself? To get by on his own, Frank became a thief. He spent most of his youth in juvenile detention centers. There he learned how to be cunning and how to survive as a prisoner. And cunning means to, sneaky. When he was free, he went back to stealing to make his way. As an adult, Morris added armed robbery to his list of crimes. And boys and girls, armed robbery means that you are armed with a weapon. Just a regular robbery means that you don't have a weapon. You can't hurt anyone except maybe with your hands. But armed means that you have a gun or a knife or something that would hurt someone else. Each time he was busted and sent to prison, he escaped. Each time he was recaptured, his sentence was all the longer because of the escapes. Finally, in November 1955, wanting to get enough money to escape the country and start a new life, Morris broke into a bank in Louisiana with two partners. They used a torch to cut into the vault, which was booby-trapped with tear gas. In spite of the gassing, the three men escaped with about $6,000. After 9 months, they were caught, and Morris found himself in prison once more. This time, he was in the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. Morris quickly got involved into a plan to escape, but the guards figured out something was up and searched Morris's cell. There, they found a set of lockpicks. After a stint in segregation, Morris got involved in another plan. This time, he and his accomplices were more careful. Using bar spreaders they had made, one prisoner went to the cell house window during recreation time and spread the bars apart. When it was Morris's turn to slip through the opening, the entire window came loose and crashed to the floor, attracting the attention of the guards. By that time, Morris had escaped so many times or tried to escape that the authorities decided a big change was needed. So they sent Morris to Alcatraz, the inescapable prison. Or was it? Dun, dun, dun. The Anglin brothers were a lot louder and more outgoing than Morris. They came from a Southern family with 13 or 14 children. Sources are different in different accounts, so they're not quite sure how many, if it was 13 or 14. And grew up working as farm hands. That means helping on the farm. They were poor, but the family worked very hard. Their parents were described as honest, but poverty led the children to drop out of school and leave home looking for work to help support their family. The family moved to a small town of Ruskin, Florida during World War II, which was between the years 1939 and 1945. By this time, JW and Clarence were in their early teens. They were only a year apart in age and had grown very, very close. They began to steal, but when they were caught, they were always quick to confess. The brothers also loved to swim. When the family went to Michigan in May to work as cherry pickers, like literally picking cherries off of trees, the boys would swim in Lake Michigan no matter how cold it was. Sometimes there was even ice in the water and left over from the winter. And boys and girls, that's a very important clue to this story, that these England brothers could withstand very, very frigid cold water. The young Anglin boys also built boats out of any scraps they could find. Perhaps their skills of swimming in frigid water and building boats came in handy years later when they tried to escape. As teens, the boys got into trouble for theft and breaking and entering. They wanted money for fancy clothes and dates, and they became quite skilled at busting into service stations after hours to steal cash and goods to sell. They avoided violence, but while they had a knack for a crime, they had little skill for getting away with it. Things got more serious when Clarence and another brother, Alfred, were arrested in 1951 for a burglary in Florida. They were adults now and sentenced to 4 years in a state prison. 6 months later, the two brothers escaped from a road camp where they'd been working. It was the first of many escapes for them both. They set into a pattern of committing a burglary, enjoying a short spree, getting arrested and sentenced, and then breaking out of prison. In January 1958, JW got together with Clarence and Alfred, both of whom had broken out of prison and were in hiding. The three of them had wives or girlfriends, and all needed money. Naturally, they planned a bank robbery. For the first time, they would stage a daring daytime robbery using a real-looking toy gun, because these men were not violent men. They targeted a bank in Columbia, Alabama. JW sat outside in the getaway car while Alfred and Clarence went in. Holding the pistol, Clarence convinced the bank president to fork over more than $20,000 in cash and traveler's checks. Then the men hid out in Ohio with their wives and girlfriends. They were caught 5 days later. Because the money in the bank was insured by the U.S. government, they had committed a federal crime on top of a state crime. So boys and girls, there's different types of prisons. There's city ones. And then if you have to stay longer, there's state prisons. So if you do something in that state, you're sentenced to that prison. And then there's federal crimes, and you could be sentenced to a federal prison. Alcatraz was a federal prison. And because they robbed a bank and the money's backed by the United States government, when you put your money in there after the Great Depression, so that you don't, your money's insured, it's now a federal offense to rob a bank. The conviction was formed for armed robbery, even though the gun was fake. But even though they used a toy gun, because it looked real, it was for armed robbery. These factors meant stiff penalties for the brothers. Clarence and Alfred received a total sentence of 40 years, and JW, the driver, received 35 years. They weren't bad guys. JW's former girlfriend said they were just dirt poor and wanted money. Bad guys or not, the men were sent to federal prisons to do their time. All three went to the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary at first, but officials thought it best to separate Clarence from Alfred, the two brothers, since the two had escaped so many times together before. So Clarence was transferred to Leavenworth in Kansas. Officials thought Alfred posed the greatest risk, so they moved JW out of Atlanta as well and into Leavenworth. Reunited again, Clarence and JW immediately began plans to break out. Their attempt was the ill-conceived breadbox plan that resulted in JW's transfer to Alcatraz. A couple months later, Clarence was busted for smuggling a letter for another inmate. And smuggling means bringing in something that you're not supposed to have. So he was smuggling a letter for another prison friend. It was not as serious as trying to escape, but it was enough to get him sent to Alcatraz with his brother. Alan West was an escape artist, too. He was serving his second term on Alcatraz. After the first, he'd been sent to serve the remainder of his sentence in a Florida prison. But West had escaped by holding a gun to the associate warden's head. When he was recaptured, he was sent back to Alcatraz. West was originally from New York City, but had spent much of his life in Georgia. He even spoke with a slight southern accent. West's favorite crime was stealing cars, and it was stealing a car and driving it across state lines that had got him sent to Alcatraz in the first place. Unlike the Anglin brothers who avoided violence, West was known as a tough guy who was quick to attack. Across his fist, he had letters tattooed, one for each finger, and it said, "Hard luck." In many ways, West was the key to the escape, even though he was one that couldn't escape. I wonder why. You have to find out and keep reading to find out, I guess. He'd been in Alcatraz the longest, since 1957, and he worked maintenance jobs. The jobs allowed him access to many of the area prisons so he could paint bars or walls, sweep up dust, or make minor repairs. While doing these jobs, West had cased much of the facility, and he was a talker. It was West who had told Morris about the missing fan motor in the ventilator shaft, putting the whole plan in motion. Okay, boys and girls, we're going to stop there at chapter 3. So now you need to go back into Google Classroom. You need to make sure you look at the book text if you haven't already, so you can see some of the pictures we've added. And as we go, there's going to be a whole lot more pictures to add. And then you need to do the Google form. Now this time I included the reading and the language arts together, the questions together. So after you've read chapters 1, 2, and 3, all you have to do is click on the Google form and do the questions, and it will count for reading and language arts. There's both questions there. I just made it on one Google form so that because kids were struggling to remember to do the language arts one as well. So I just included them both together. Okay, boys and girls, I hope you are enjoying our story. I promise you it's a good one. We're going to learn all about the men who actually escaped the inescapable prison. And then I have an actual escape room I made last year for the kids, and it's super fun, just like the one we did for the Sherlock Holmes, the Speckled Band one. So y'all will get to do that as well. And then I'll put some optional videos and stuff up so y'all can watch and look at, of course, their learning videos. There is an actual movie about this, but it's PG, but it's from a while back, so PG, maybe it should be rated a little bit different, and I'll send an email out to your parents to tell them about it, and it's their choice if they want you to watch it. But I don't want you to watch that until the very end. Okay, boys and girls, if your parents say okay. Have a great day. I miss y'all so much. I want to give y'all big hugs. I hope y'all are doing well and everyone's healthy. Love y'all. Bye, guys.